I came home from a 12-hour shift at the clinic to find my front door unlocked, my kitchen light on, and a pair of boots I hadn't seen in 7 months sitting on the mat inside the hallway. Scuffed brown leather, one lace broken, the left heel worn down the way it always was, because she walked like she was permanently leaning into a wind only she could feel. I stood in the doorway with my keys in one hand and my bag sliding off my shoulder, and I knew, before I took another step, exactly who was in my apartment. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't understand for another 72 hours when everything I thought I'd put back together was on fire, was why. I walked down the hall. My bedroom door was open, and there she was, Noor Hassani, my best friend, my former roommate, the woman who had walked out of my life on a Wednesday in March without a goodbye and without an explanation, curled on the left side of my bed in her coat with her shoes off, and her face pressed into the pillow I still hadn't moved to the center of the mattress, because some habits are just fossils of the person who made them. She was asleep. Her mascara had run. There was a bruise on the inside of her left wrist, the yellow-green kind that's 4 or 5 days old, the kind I'd learned to read in nursing school. I sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't touch her. I sat there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, listening to her breathe, the way I used to hear her breathe through the thin wall between our rooms when we shared this apartment for 3 years. Before she met Amir, before she started disappearing by degrees, before the Wednesday in March when I came home, and her closet was empty, and her keys were on the counter, and all she'd left was a text that said, "I can't do this anymore. Please don't contact me." She stirred, opened her eyes, looked at me the way you look at someone you've hurt, not with guilt, which is performative, but with the raw, specific shame of a person who knows exactly what they did and has lived inside the knowledge of it for months. "I'm sorry," she said. 3 syllables. 7 months of silence. I'd imagined hearing those words so many times that the real version felt counterfeit, like holding a bill up to the light and finding no watermark. "For which part?" I said. She closed her eyes again. "For all of it. But mostly for what I'm about to tell you." I should have felt relieved. For 7 months I'd rehearsed this moment in the shower, in the car, in the gray hours between 2 and 4 a.m., when sleep wouldn't come and my brain replayed every version of her return, sometimes angry, sometimes tender, sometimes a door slamming, sometimes a door opening. In every version, "I'm sorry" was the hinge, the magic sentence, the thing that would make 7 months of silence resolve into something I could live with. But sitting on the edge of my own bed, looking at the bruise on her wrist and the mascara tracks on the pillow, the apology didn't feel like resolution. It felt like the first page of something I hadn't agreed to read. My name is Layla Farid. I'm 29. I'm a registered nurse at a family medicine clinic in Minneapolis, the kind of clinic where the waiting room has hand sanitizer dispensers that are always empty and a fish tank that hasn't had a fish in it since before I was hired. I work long shifts. I come home tired, and for the past 7 months I've lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment that used to be ours, mine and Noor's, and is now mine in the way that a table set for 2 is yours after the other person stops showing up. You don't clear the second place setting. You just stop looking at it. Noor and I met in college. She was studying urban planning. I was pre-nursing. We lived on the same floor of a dorm that smelled permanently of burnt popcorn and cheap lavender, and we became friends the way you become friends, at 19. Fast, without negotiation, through the accumulation of small shared crises. She locked herself out at 2 a.m., and I let her sleep in my room. I had a panic attack before an organic chemistry exam, and she sat on the bathroom floor with me and read her urban design textbook out loud until my breathing slowed. Not because the content was calming, but because her voice was. We got an apartment together after sophomore year and stayed in it for 6 years. Through graduation, through first jobs, through a period when I couldn't afford my share of rent, and she covered it for 3 months without ever mentioning it again. She was the most dependable person I'd ever known. That's why her leaving broke something I didn't know could break. She met Amir Kassar in September, 14 months before she disappeared. He was charming in the way that charm becomes a warning sign only in retrospect. Attentive, generous, always available, always interested, always making Noor feel like she was the most important person in whatever room they shared. He brought her flowers on a Tuesday, for no reason. He remembered things she'd mentioned once, a childhood nickname, a restaurant she'd wanted to try, the specific shade of blue she said her grandmother's kitchen tiles were. He made her feel seen in a way I think she'd been hungry for without knowing it. The way people who grew up being competent and reliable are hungry for someone to say, "I see you," not just what you do. I liked him at first. I want to be honest about that. I liked the way Noor laughed around him, louder, easier, with a freedom in it that I hadn't heard before. I liked the flowers. I liked that someone was paying attention to her in a way I couldn't, because I was her roommate, not her person. And there's a difference between the love that lives in the same apartment and the love that chooses you from across a room. The changes came slowly. She started spending more nights at his place. Normal, then she stopped coming to our Sunday morning coffee ritual. The one we'd done for 5 years. The one where we'd sit at the kitchen table in pajamas and talk about everything and nothing for 2 hours while the light moved across the countertop. She said Amir liked to do brunch on Sundays. Normal. Then she stopped answering texts during the day. Then she started canceling plans with a vagueness that wasn't like her. Something came up. Not feeling it today. Maybe next week. Then she stopped making plans at all. I tried to talk to her about it twice. The first time, she said I was overthinking it. The second time, she said, with a sharpness I'd never heard from her, "Not everyone needs to be needed the way you need to be needed, Layla." That sentence lived in my chest like a splinter for months. I stopped asking. I stopped bringing it up. I adjusted, which is what you do when someone you love draws a line. Because respecting the line feels like love even when the line was drawn by someone else's hand. Then, March, the empty closet. The keys on the counter. The text. I called her 19 times in 2 days. I left messages that started calm and got less calm. I texted essays. I drove to Amir's apartment, a sleek place in the North Loop that I'd only been to twice, and buzzed the intercom and got no answer. I filed a welfare check with the police, who called me back 3 hours later and said they'd spoken with her and she was fine and did not want contact. Fine and did not want contact. I repeated those words to myself for weeks like a prayer in a language I didn't speak. Now she was in my bed with a bruise on her wrist saying she was sorry, and the thing she was about to tell me hadn't started yet. I made tea, not because either of us wanted tea, but because making tea is what you do when the person in front of you is about to say something that will rearrange the furniture in your head, and you need your hands to have a job. I brought 2 mugs into the bedroom and sat on the floor with my back against the dresser and waited. Noor sat up. She wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't drink. "He took my money," she said. "All of it." It came out flat, factual, like she was reading from a document she'd already memorized. Amir had convinced her, gradually and with what felt at the time like love, to merge their finances. First a shared credit card, then a joint savings account. Then, 4 months in, he suggested she add his name to her personal checking account for emergencies. In case something happens to you and I need to handle things. She did it because she trusted him, and because the request came wrapped in care, in the language of planning a future together, of being a team, of not keeping walls between two people who loved each other. By the time she moved into his apartment, the move that emptied her closet and mine, he had access to everything. Her checking, her savings, the small investment account her father had started for her when she was 15, her credit cards, her social security number, which she'd given him to file taxes jointly, even though they weren't married, because he'd told her it would save them both money, and she'd believed him because why wouldn't you believe the person who remembers the color of your grandmother's tiles? How much? I asked. $43,000, give or take. I set my mug on the floor very carefully, because if I held it any tighter, it was going to shatter. There's more, she said. He opened a lease in my name, a commercial space in St. Paul, some kind of consulting office. I've never seen it. The lease is 18 months at $3,200 a month, and I'm the sole guarantor. If it defaults, which it already has, he stopped paying in June, the landlord comes after me. He filed the paperwork in January. I didn't know about it until a collections agency called me 3 weeks ago. Nora looked at me over the rim of her untouched tea. Her eyes were steady, but her hands were shaking, and the shaking was the thing I believed, because Nora's hands never shook. She'd held a tarantula at a zoo once without flinching. She'd changed a flat tire on I-94 in a January windstorm while I sat in the passenger seat hyperventilating. Her hands were the steadiest thing about her, and now they were trembling against the ceramic. He didn't just take my money, Layla. He took my name, my credit, my ability to rent an apartment or get a loan or exist in any financial system without a flag on my file. I spent 3 weeks trying to fix it on my own, and I couldn't, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. So I came here. Why didn't you come sooner? She looked down. Because of what I said to you, the last time we talked, about needing to be needed. She swallowed. He told me to say that. He said you were too close, that you were controlling, that real love doesn't need to monitor the other person. I knew it wasn't true when I said it. I said it anyway, and I've been too ashamed to face you ever since. He made you say that. He suggested it. I chose to say it. There's a difference, and I'm not going to hide behind it. Something cracked in my chest, not the anger I'd been carrying for 7 months, but the casing around it. The anger was still there. But underneath it, preserved like something frozen, was the love I'd tried to bury, and it was fully intact. And it hurt worse than the anger ever did. You can stay, I said. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. You don't owe me that. I know I don't. Stay anyway. Tomorrow came with a phone call that changed everything. I was in the kitchen at 7 a.m. Nora's still asleep when my cell rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I answer unknown numbers. Occupational hazard of working at a clinic where patients sometimes call from new phones. Is this Layla Farid? Male voice. Calm, pleasant, even who's calling. My name's Amir. I think we have a mutual friend. I went cold. Not figuratively, my skin prickled and my vision narrowed, and I gripped the kitchen counter with my free hand because my knees had gone soft. I don't have anything to say to you. That's fine. I just need you to pass along a message. Tell Nor the lease hearing is Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Ramsey County Courthouse. If she doesn't show, the default judgment goes on her record, not mine. Hers, and the landlord's attorney is not a patient man. She didn't sign that lease. She did, actually, page 4. bottom right. Her signature, notarized. I can send you a copy if you'd like. A pause. Also, Layla, and this is just a friendly heads up, you might want to check your credit report. You never know what turns up. He hung up. I stood in the kitchen with the phone against my ear listening to dead air, and his voice was still in the room. Not the words, but the tone. The specific, practiced calm of a person who has made this kind of call before and knows exactly how much silence to leave after the threat so it has time to settle into your bloodstream. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't cursed. He'd been polite. And the politeness was the most terrifying part, because it meant he wasn't afraid. People who are afraid raise their voices. People who are in control speak softly and let the content of their sentences do the damage. I locked the front door. I checked the deadbolt twice. I walked through every room in the apartment, kitchen, bathroom, Noor's old room, the closet, the way a person does when their body has decided they're in danger and their brain is still catching up. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and did the thing he'd told me to do. Because whatever else he wasn't bluffing. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the free credit monitoring site I'd signed up for during a slow afternoon at the clinic a year ago and never checked since. Because my credit was fine. Because I paid my bills. Because I was a responsible person who did not need to monitor a score that had never been anything but steady. I logged in. The page loaded slowly, the way pages load when the universe is giving you one last second to not know the thing you're about to know. And there it was. A new credit card, opened 4 months ago, in my name. Issued by a bank I'd never heard of. A balance of $11,800. A billing address I'd never lived at. A P.O. box in Bloomington. A phone number that wasn't mine. Charges at stores I'd never visited in cities I hadn't been to. The account was 60 days past due. There was already a delinquency flag on my report. I didn't scream. I set the laptop on the table very slowly. The way you set down something that might explode. I read every line 3 times. My name, spelt correctly. My social security number, correct to the last digit. My date of birth, accurate. Someone had become me on paper, perfectly and completely, and used that paper version of me to spend $11,800 furnishing a life I'd never lived. Then I walked into the bedroom and woke Noor up, and I said, in a voice I didn't recognize as mine, "Did you ever give him my social security number?" The look on her face told me everything. "The tax thing," she whispered. "When we lived together. I had our old tax documents in a file, the years we filed separately, but used the same accountant. Your social was on the forms. He had access to my files. He opened a credit card in my name, Noor, $11,000. She started crying. Not the cinematic kind, the ugly, airless kind where your body folds in half and your hands cover your face and the sounds that come out don't sound like a person. I watched her cry, and I felt 2 things simultaneously that shouldn't be able to exist in the same body. A fury so total it turned my vision white at the edges, and a tenderness so deep it made me want to put my arms around her and never let go. I chose the tenderness. The fury I saved for him. We had 5 days until Wednesday. The hearing was at 9 a.m. If Noor didn't appear, the default judgment on the lease would become a civil judgment. $57,600 in unpaid rent and penalties, attached to her name, reported to every credit bureau, garnishable from future wages. If she did appear, she'd need to prove she hadn't willingly signed the lease, which meant she'd need evidence that Amir had forged her signature or obtained it through coercion. 5 days. No lawyer. No money for a lawyer. A fraudulent credit card in my name. and a man who knew where we lived, because he'd called my cell phone, which meant he had my number, which meant he probably had my address. That night, while Noor slept on the couch, she'd insisted on giving me back my bed, a small act of consideration that made me want to cry. I sat at the kitchen table and did what I do when the world is ending. I made a list. First, the credit card fraud. I called the card issuer's fraud department at 11 p.m. They're open 24 hours, because fraud doesn't sleep, and neither did I. I filed a dispute. The representative asked me to file a police report and send them a copy. I said I would. She froze the card. $11,000 in charges, frozen with a phone call. The relief lasted about 4 seconds before I remembered everything else. Second, the police report. I went to the Minneapolis Police Department's online portal and filed reports for both the credit card opened in my name and the commercial lease opened in Noor's. The system generated case numbers. Case numbers are not justice, but they are the beginning of a paper trail, and a paper trail is the only weapon that works against someone who builds his power out of documents. Third, the lease. I needed to see it. I needed the actual document with Noor's alleged signature on page 4. If it was forged, a handwriting comparison could prove it. If it was real, if he'd tricked her into signing something she didn't read, the fight was harder, but not impossible. I searched Ramsey County court records online and found the case filing. The landlord's attorney had uploaded the lease as an exhibit. I downloaded it at 1:30 a.m. and opened it on my kitchen table and turned to page 4. The signature was Noor's, or something very close to it. But the date next to the signature was January 14th, and I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through my calendar and found what I was hoping to find. On January 14th, Noor and Amir had been at a dinner party at his colleague's house. Noor had posted an Instagram story from the party at 8 p.m. The notary stamp on the lease said the document was signed and notarized at 3:15 p.m. On January 14th, at an office in St. Paul, either Noor had driven to St. Paul, signed a commercial lease she'd never mentioned to anyone, driven back to Minneapolis, and gone to a dinner party 5 hours later without ever bringing it up, or she hadn't signed it at all. I screenshotted the Instagram story. I screenshotted the notary stamp. I put them side by side in a document and saved it 3 times. Once on my laptop, once on a USB drive, once in a Google Drive folder shared with an email account I created specifically for this purpose, because Amir had already demonstrated that he could reach into digital systems and take what he wanted, and I was not going to make it easy. At noon, while Noor was in the shower, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from the same unknown number. Amir again. His voice was still calm, still pleasant, like a man confirming a dinner reservation. Layla, I want to make sure we understand each other. Noor has a history of emotional instability. She's going to tell you I did things I didn't do, and you're going to believe her because she's your friend and that's what friends do. But the documents are real. The signature is real. And if you help her contest this, you're inserting yourself into a legal proceeding where you have no standing, and that has consequences. I'm sure you know that, being a professional and all. Have a good day. I saved the voicemail. I transcribed it by hand on a legal pad. I noted the time, the number, and the exact wording of that has consequences. Because that sentence wasn't information. It was a threat wearing a blazer. The signature's real. The person who made it isn't. That's what I said to Noor when she came out of the shower. And she looked at the 2 screenshots and pressed her hand over her mouth and said, "He practiced my signature. I saw him doing it once. He said he was doodling. Day 3. Tuesday afternoon. 2 pieces of evidence arrived that I wasn't expecting. The first came from the credit card company. The fraud investigator assigned to my case called and said that the card opened in my name had been used primarily at 3 locations: a furniture store in St. Paul, a printing shop in Roseville, and a FedEx office in Bloomington. The furniture purchases matched items that would furnish a small office. The printing shop had produced business cards and stationery for a consulting firm called Cassar Strategic Partners. The FedEx charges were for overnight shipping of documents to an address in Chicago. He'd used my stolen identity to furnish and brand the fake office that was leased under Noor's stolen identity. The 2 frauds were connected. He'd woven us together. The second piece of evidence came from a person I'd never met. Noor had spent the morning going through her old email, searching for anything from Amir that referenced the lease, the finances, or the consulting firm. She found something better: a forwarded email chain between Amir and a woman named Dina Khoury, someone Noor vaguely remembered as Amir's ex-girlfriend from before they dated. The email chain was from October, and Noor had been BCC'd on it, apparently by accident. In the chain, Amir was asking Dina for help setting up the new entity and mentioned needing a guarantor who won't ask questions. Noor hadn't read the email when it arrived. She'd assumed it was a work thread she'd been copied on by mistake. Now, reading it for the first time, the phrase "a guarantor who won't ask questions" landed like a brick through a window. I searched for Dina Khoury on every platform I could find: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, public records. I found her in 20 minutes. She lived in Chicago, the same city the FedEx documents had been shipped to. She was listed as the registered agent for a business called Cassar Strategic Partners, LLC, the same name on the business cards printed with my stolen credit card. I messaged her. I told her who I was. I told her my friend was being destroyed by a man we both knew. I asked her if she'd be willing to talk. She responded in 9 minutes. I was hoping someone would connect the dots. Dina's story filled in the architecture. Amir didn't have a job. He hadn't had one in 2 years. What he had was a system, a repeating cycle of financial parasitism that used romantic relationships as the entry point. He'd meet someone. He'd be extraordinary, attentive, generous, impossible not to trust. He'd merge finances. He'd extract access to their identity. He'd open accounts and leases and shell entities in their names, run up charges, drain what he could. And then, when the structure started collapsing, he'd vanish and leave the debt behind like a shed skin. Dina had been the person before Noor. She'd lost $22,000 and spent 8 months repairing credit damage that showed up on every background check, every rental application, every job screening. She'd been denied an apartment lease during that period. She'd been flagged during a pre-employment check for a position she was overqualified for. She'd reported Amir to the police in Cook County. The case was technically open. In practice, it was sitting in a pile of financial fraud cases that a single overworked detective was processing at the rate of about 1 per month. "He doesn't break the law in one jurisdiction," she said on the phone, her voice carrying the specific weariness of someone who has explained this to people who nod sympathetically and do nothing. "He scatters it. Your friend's lease is in Ramsey County. Your credit card was opened using an address in Hennepin County. My business filing is in Cook County, Illinois. 3 jurisdictions, 3 sets of cops, 3 understaffed fraud units. Nobody sees the full picture because the picture is cut into pieces and mailed to different cities." "What if someone showed them the full picture?" I asked. "Then you'd need everything in one document. One timeline. One narrative. something a prosecutor could hold in their hands and see the whole pattern. I looked at the kitchen table, the police reports, the credit card dispute, the lease with the forged signature, the Instagram timestamp, the email chain, the business registration, Dina's story. It was all there, scattered across 2 states and 5 days of no sleep, but it was all there. I can build that, I said. Can you send me your police report and the business filing? I'll send it tonight. The hearing is tomorrow morning, then you'd better not sleep. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until 4 a.m., building the document I wished someone had built for Dina 2 years ago. It was 12 pages. A chronological timeline covering 18 months, beginning with Amir's first contact with Noor and ending with the phone call he'd made to my kitchen 5 days ago. Every entry had a date, a description, and a supporting document attached as an exhibit. The email chain. The lease with the notary timestamp contradicted by the Instagram story. The credit card fraud report. Dina's police report from Chicago. The business filing linking all 3 names, his, Noor's, mine, in a single entity none of us had authorized. I printed 4 copies. 1 for us. 1 for the court. 1 for the landlord's attorney. 1 for the Ramsey County DA's office. At 6 a.m., I woke Noor. She was on the couch under a blanket I'd bought during the years we lived together, a soft gray thing from Target that she'd picked out and I'd paid for, and neither of us had ever claimed as specifically ours. She opened her eyes and looked at me, and I held up the document. We're going to that hearing, I said, and we're bringing everything. I can't ask you to do this. You didn't. I'm volunteering. Get dressed. The hearing was in a small courtroom on the 3rd floor of the Ramsey County Courthouse. The kind of room where the fluorescent lights buzz at a frequency designed to make anxiety worse, and the chairs are bolted to the floor, as if someone once tried to throw one, and the county decided prevention was cheaper than repair. The landlord's attorney was a thin man in a gray suit with a briefcase that looked expensive and a face that looked tired. Noor's name was on the docket as the respondent. She had no lawyer. She had me, a registered nurse with a 12-page document and 4 hours of sleep, and the kind of fury that presents, from the outside, as extreme calm. I am not an attorney. I cannot practice law. I cannot offer legal counsel or represent another person in court. What I can do is stand next to my friend at the respondent's table and hand a judge a document and say, in a clear voice that does not shake, Your Honor, the respondent believes the signature on this lease was forged, and we have evidence to support that claim, along with evidence of a broader pattern of identity fraud and financial manipulation across 2 states involving multiple victims. The landlord's attorney looked at me. He looked at the document. He looked at the judge. He did not object, which told me he hadn't expected us to show up with anything at all, let alone 12 pages and exhibits. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who has seen every version of human deception and is no longer surprised by any of them, took the document. She read it for 7 minutes without speaking. The courtroom was silent except for the buzzing lights and the sound of Noor breathing next to me, measured and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was trying not to fall apart. The judge looked up. She looked at the landlord's attorney. She said, I'm continuing this matter 30 days. I'm referring the fraud allegations to the county attorney's office, and I'm ordering that no default judgment be entered until the investigation is complete. The landlord's attorney opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded. 30 days. Not a victory, not an acquittal, but a stay, a pause in the machinery that was grinding toward Noor, bought with 12 pages and a timeline, and the stubborn, furious belief that a document built out of truth weighs more than a signature built built out of practice. Noor didn't speak until we were in the car. Then she said very quietly, "You stayed up all night." "Yes, for me. For us." He used my name too. "This isn't charity, Noor. This is mutual self-defense." She laughed. It was small and broken and real, and it was the first time I'd heard her laugh in 7 months. 3 things happened in the 30 days that followed, and I want to tell you about them because they're the part of the story that matters more than the courtroom. First, the Ramsey County Attorney's Office opened a formal investigation into Amir Kassar. They contacted Dina in Chicago. They contacted the Hennepin County Fraud Unit about my credit card. For the first time, someone with subpoena power was looking at the full pattern, not one thread, but the whole web. I don't know where that investigation stands today. These things move slowly, but they are moving. And movement is the thing Amir's system was designed to prevent, because his power depended on each victim being isolated, each jurisdiction being blind, each story existing alone without a pattern to connect it to. Second, Noor moved back in. Not into my bed, into her old room, which I'd been using as a storage space for things I didn't want to think about. We cleared it out together on a Saturday afternoon, carrying boxes of old textbooks and unused kitchen appliances down to the basement. And when the room was empty, she stood in the doorway and said, "It's smaller than I remembered." "No," I said. "You're bigger." She looked at me, and for the first time since she'd shown up asleep in my bed, she didn't look like someone carrying a wound. She looked like someone putting a room back together. Third, I told her what I'd never told her. Not about the anger. She knew about the anger. It was obvious. It lived in every careful sentence I'd said since she arrived. I told her about the missing. The Sunday mornings, I'd sat at the kitchen table alone with 2 mugs of coffee because I couldn't bring myself to make just one. The time I heard someone laugh in a grocery store and turned around because it sounded like her. The night, 2 months after she left, when I'd walked into her empty room and sat on the floor in the dark and talked to no one about my day, because the habit of telling her things was stronger than the fact that she was gone. "I wasn't angry that you left," I said. "I was angry that you left without letting me help. That's different." She was quiet. Then, she said, "I know. He knew that too. That's why he made me cut you off first. Because you were the one person who would have seen it. He didn't make you invisible, Noor. You were always visible. I was always looking." She reached across the kitchen table and put her hand on mine, the hand with the bruise, now faded to the faint yellow of something almost healed. And neither of us said anything for a while, and the silence wasn't empty the way the apartment had been empty for 7 months. It was full of the specific, hard-won understanding that arrives only after you've been through something together that should have broken you and didn't. I don't know what happens next. The investigation is ongoing. The lease dispute is pending. My credit is still flagged. Noor's savings are still gone. Amir is still out there, somewhere, probably charming someone new, probably remembering some new woman's grandmother's tile color, probably laying the first invisible threads of a web she won't feel until it tightens. But he miscalculated one thing. He thought isolation was permanent. He thought the silence he'd engineered between me and Noor was structural, load-bearing, the kind that holds even when the person inside it is drowning. He was wrong. Silence is not a wall. It's a held breath, and held breaths end. She came back. She said the words, and the words were not the point. The words were just the door. What mattered was everything that came after. The tea, the table, the 12 pages, the night I didn't sleep, the morning we walked into a courtroom together and refused to let a forged signature rewrite who we were. I'm telling you this because I think you might be holding your breath right now. And I think someone you love might be waiting for you to exhale. I need to ask you something, and I don't want you to answer it fast. Have you ever lost someone, not because they stopped loving you, but because someone else convinced them that your love was the thing they needed to escape? And did you spend the months after wondering whether they were right? And the person you lost, if they showed up tomorrow, not with an excuse, but with the truth, would you make the tea? Or would you lock the door? If this story opens something, subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another one.